As we all have experienced, it is getting increasingly more difficult to know whether or not people are actively engaged in your church. So, today on Practical Church Planting, we're going to share with you 6 church metrics that can track engagement.
Well, thanks for joining us again today on Practical Church Planting. Today we're going to be giving you 6 church metrics that show engagement.
I was checking something out last night on our Practical Church YouTube channel, and I realized our
Okay.
last 3 episodes I've worn my New City hoodie.
Oh, yeah.
And today I'm also wearing my New City hoodie.
Yeah. And not filmed on the same day.
I know. So, promise, I don't just wear my New City hoodie. So, we're in a new year. COVID is up. At this recording, before we started, I was like, it's supposed to be peaking in a couple of weeks. And I always feel like we say next month, maybe next month.
1 year.
But, last couple episodes we've talked about, even in our previous episode about church predictions for 2022. Go listen to that, 9 of them. Trying to figure out how do we best engage people. A lot of the other traditional metrics like attendance and giving are still helpful, but it doesn't necessarily mean that people are being engaged, especially when people are maybe attending less frequently, but engaged in other ways, and giving might be higher. Even if it's just a lot of weird stuff.
Yeah.
So how do we track things that actually show if we're helping people and engaging people? And so that's what we're going to give you this episode.
That's right.
Some of these, as always, might be more obvious than not. Some of these we've talked about before. Some of them we haven't. And so we're going to tell you how we do it, how you can do it as well.
Yep.
So here we go. Number 1, group attendance. And so this is not just how many people are in groups, because as we all know, people sign up for stuff and they never go to them.
Yep.
It doesn't mean they're actually in them. And so what we do, and we've shared this before, there's been a couple of questions in our Practical Church Planting Facebook group about it. We have, at the end of the day, you got to do this the easiest way possible, so your leaders will actually say who's in their group, and then you have to just anticipate you got to follow up with them. Like it just happens. Don't get mad about it. It's just important. After time, Brian does it now, so maybe you do it less and less. I don't know, but you just got to do it. And so what we do is we track who's in your group, and then we also have people track every single week. We have the group leaders go in on a Google spreadsheet and say who was there, so we can actually know if people are coming. And we've said in previous episodes, we have like monthly tracking stuff that we go over with our elders, and so we've actually added group attendance, monthly group attendance to our tracking sheet, like you would do the average Sunday attendance stuff or whatever. And so we use a Google Sheet. Every group leader has their own that we make, so we don't have them do it. And it just has, I don't know, the XY axis stuff. It has all their names going up and down. And then left to right, it just has the dates. And all they do is they just type an X for each person that was there that week. The next week they type an X. If there's not there, they don't give them an X. And that way it lets us know who's actually coming to group, how often they're coming. It also helps it's easy to know when you're adding people to groups too, like who has a room and who doesn't. Just because you have 12 people in a group, does it actually mean
12 people are attending.
This is like 6 people on average showing up, they got more room.
Yeah.
And so group attendance, not just how many people are in groups, but actually are they showing up, is a great way to measure engagement at your church.
Yeah. In fact, I would say that the amount of people signed up for the group doesn't really matter. I mean, obviously you want more people to be signing up, but who's actually showing up is what matters, because group leaders will be very, I think for the most part, very, they'll apologize for their people more. And in other words, they know what's going on. They understand that people maybe need to take breaks from group. And so I think I've seen a lot of group leaders will say that they have more people in their group than are actually attending, because they kind of know what's going on in everybody's life, which is fine. But we need to know who's actually showing up, because then we can figure out if we have more room, or then we can kind of see if someone is getting more engaged with the church or kind of starting to disengage. And so instead of just asking someone how many people do you have in your group, because then they might count some people who have signed up. They don't want to count them out. It's just how many people showed up Monday. It's every week. It's how many people showed up. And so, like you said, we have each group leader has their own Google Sheet that's just shared between them and us, and they go and update it every week. And it's super simple, and it takes any reasoning out of it or any opinion or whatever out of it. It's just simply who showed up, who didn't. And if it's people got to take little breaks for a season, that's fine. But then we can see over the long haul, did they re-engage after those breaks? Or we've had people, when I took over groups from the person who was doing it previously, who I figured were grouped. I had been told were grouped. I mean, they were grouped, so to speak, but I thought they're engaged in their group, and looked, and they hadn't been going in months. And they talk to their group leader, and they have a reason for it, and whatever. But that, we wouldn't really know that was the case if we didn't actually have these spreadsheets. And so this is how we can really really figure out who's actually engaged in groups and who is simply signed up and not attending.
And you do need to be willing to do a little work to measure things that actually matter.
Mhm.
So a lot of these things like the 4 disciplines of execution or these other things that talk about like measuring stuff and getting stuff done, sometimes you have to do a work to figure out how to measure the appropriate stuff so that you can actually improve them. And so yeah, it's going to be a little bit annoying, especially in the beginning, to ask somebody every week to fill out their thing.
Yeah.
But you just have to do it because if you don't, then they will never do it. And so they'll get used to it after a while. And there might be some people
Yep.
that every week you just have to follow up with them, and that's okay. Don't be worried about, well, this isn't scalable for forever. You're probably never going to have 50 groups.
Yeah.
So you can follow up with 5 groups,
Yep.
10 groups, whatever. And then it just becomes normal after a while. But don't give up and don't get frustrated. Even if you have to email them or you got to text them, like, hey, can you fill it out? Hey, fill it out. They'll do it eventually. I think everybody does it.
Yep.
So
I mean, people need reminders, and that's fine. And it is scalable to any size because if you got so big, you could set up an automated email that would go out every week to these people that just says fill it out. But you can do it. It's really not that hard, and the majority of people do it without a reminder.
And,
But
and if you have
even
to
they
remind
don't-
them, if you have to email them, also just include the sheet, even though they already have
Yep.
access to it. All they have to do is click on it, hit the X, just make it super simple. There's lots of ways to do it. I mean, we use Planning Center for other stuff. They have like a groups feature.
Yeah.
We've never, and I think that this is the true for a lot of churches, like people don't really create profiles for extra stuff they don't use.
Mhm.
And so you could use your church management software, but if it's something that they have to sign in for, that's an extra step. Google Sheets, you don't really sign in for it. You just do it.
Yep.
And so whatever is the least amount of steps as possible is what you want to go for.
Yep. Church I was with previously did through their church management software. It wasn't Planning Center. I can't remember what they were called, but it was more. It's not like it was hard to do, but I was one of the group leaders, and if I forgot, which I regularly did, if you were to like text me or whatever, ask me if I can go in and do it, I would have to make sure I had my computer with
Yeah.
me, and it kind of I couldn't do it right on the fly if I needed to. Where with a Google Sheet, if it emails me, I can click on it. I can do it from my phone if I want to. Or I can do it from my computer if it's right there. But
Yep.
it's much easier, and people don't have to worry about. Especially if you have older group leaders, you don't have to worry about them learning a new software or anything
Yeah.
like that. It's just super simple to do.
So that's number one. A great way to just show engagement is actual group attendance.
Yep.
Number 2, this is talking about giving. So this is not, I mean, obviously everybody tracks how much giving they get a month.
Yep.
One thing that might be helpful is tracking your giving units, which is how many people give. We call them giving units or whatever you want to call them, just because, a family is 1 unit.
Mhm.
So it's not like one person could represent 5 people.
Right.
It's a 5-person family.
Yeah.
And so that's really helpful, especially when you get months of higher giving. Or lower giving to see, or more so higher giving is like, was it just like a random gift, or how many people are giving per month kind of shows how many people are engaged, or more people giving or less people giving, time of year. And the nice thing about like the giving unit stuff, which we've always tracked, is that you get to see,
Mhm.
Your church, like seasonally, is this normal or not normal? So it helps you maybe not get as discouraged or not as maybe too encouraged.
True. Yeah.
It helps you do year over year, but giving units, so tracking how many units, unique units, it doesn't matter how many times they gave that month, and tracking those every month to help show you how many people are giving, because that also shows engagement. Because again, if you have 20 giving units and you have a really good month, if you're not tracking the giving units, you could think a lot of people gave.
Yep.
And
Exactly.
and again, I think we both are very pro pastors knowing who gives. I think
Mhm.
you should look at that. If you don't want to look at that, that's fine. You can still look at giving units without seeing names and still have an idea of how many people are giving. Is it going up or down? Is it staying the same? Give you a really good idea how many people are engaged financially in your church.
Yep. I don't have a lot to add to this, but I mean, you could look at, especially like right now it's January, and so we just had December, and for a lot of churches, I think December is usually a pretty good giving month, and you could come out of it saying like, our church is financially really healthy, or our
Yeah.
people's giving is really healthy, but that could just be a bump of a month, and so it really helps to see how many people are giving, not just that your giving is going up. Because obviously, you want people. Hopefully, over time, people are being more generous, and
Yeah.
people are increasing their giving as they're able to. But if you're just strictly looking at dollars coming in, I don't think it really gives you the full picture of how many people are engaging with the church financially.
And especially too in a time where people are coming to church less frequently, seeing giving units lets you actually know, are we still engaging them or not? So if our giving units are going up and our attendance is not what it was 2 years ago, it probably means that more people are engaged in our church in some capacity,
Mhm.
even if they're not coming as much on a Sunday, which can be encouraging to know that, there are other things you're doing, hopefully, to keep them connected.
Yeah.
But tracking, again, everyone knows to track. I mean, you have to financially, how much money you take in.
Yep.
But actually taking the time, I don't know how long this takes you to do every month. Is
It's
it
really
easy?
not bad. It depends on who you use as a
Hmm.
whatever it's called, church management software or whatever your giving platform is, and most of them have some sort of report you can pull. Like I help out with the church that we planted with their finances as well, and theirs is completely different than ours, but they have a process that's just as easy. So whoever you're using to track giving, which should be either a church management software or a financial software or something, wherever it records who donates what, it should be pretty easy to pull a report of how many people give. And so it really
Yeah.
doesn't take very long.
Yeah, and what we do for all of this, we've done in previous episodes, like the monthly data tracking sheet is what we have.
Mhm.
That's where we have sheets for all these things, and so this is one of the things we do. So putting them somewhere where you can see them every month is helpful.
Yep.
But number of giving units can be helpful for engagement.
Yes.
Number 3, this can also be helpful, talking about giving again, not just giving in general, but the giving unit average.
Mm.
So how many, what is the average amount? Is it going up? Is it going down? That's another way to see, I don't know. I don't want to say how bought in people are because it's different based on where your church is planted, the economic status or of the people at your church. But not just how many people are giving, but about how much can let you know how healthy things are and how engaged people are.
Yeah, exactly. None of these is like the reason we give a bunch isn't just necessarily to give you a bunch of options, but if
Yep.
you do a bunch of these, it helps give you kind of a fuller picture. So this one alone isn't going to answer the question for you, but I think it really helps with the others, and you can see if people are increasing in their generosity, not just the amount of people like the previous one, but the people that are giving, are they increasing in their giving? Is it staying pretty stagnant? And so you can see kind of, well, we do this we probably look at this once a year. We don't look at this on a monthly.
Yeah, so we don't have like a data monthly sheet for this,
this one,
but
yeah.
we do from time to time.
Yep. We pull it
Calculate
at a minimum of once a year because we use it to create the next year's budget.
Yep.
But we pretty much just look at what the average giver or donor gives, or average giving unit gives, and we want it to be, not going down. I guess is really not going down. Hopefully, it's increasing. But if it's going down, then we can see that there might be something that needs to be addressed.
And it's also helpful too, especially if you track the giving units or whatever, because it could be going down because you're getting more givers. That's a good thing.
Sure. Yep.
Or going down because people are giving less. And not that you can control these things, like you can't control how much people give or the giving unit average, but it can tell you like if it's going up or going down, or if you're trying different things to raise more money, it can tell you how effective it is.
Yeah.
If you want to try different strategies on how often you talk about giving, or if you do a sermon on giving or whatever, or like a generosity campaign or whatever, at the end of the day, you'll probably, the monthly donations you take in will be higher, which is helpful, but it won't necessarily tell you, like, again, how many people gave, or did the average person give more, or is it just like a couple people that were inspired? If you actually look at the giving unit average, it gives you a better idea of how, bought in is not the right word, but how, where people are at. Is it if it's going up, it means they're growing in their generosity. Generally speaking, there could be various reasons for that. But if generosity, for a lot of smaller churches or church plants, fundraising is difficult. The money is tight.
Sure.
And so if there's different strategies you want to try to do to increase donations, and we've got episodes like this in the past, tracking unit average will let you know if it's being effective or not.
Yep. This is a good thing just to start looking at and kind of figuring out how to look at as well, because every year one of the biggest, not one of the biggest challenges, but I think one of the places that creates a lot of confusion is how to create a budget for the next year.
Yep.
And especially when it comes to the income side, because hopefully we just grow so much, we have so much money, but like we don't know what's a realistic way to project our income, and we can't really project our expenses until we project our income, and vice versa. We have to do them both. And so if we can figure out how to do this, how to kind of create this formula, then we can actually start looking at what the finances could look like the following year. If we were to grow by 1 giving unit a month, what would that look like? If we were to grow by 2, and obviously at most of our sizes, it's probably not going to be more. Probably don't want to look at more than 2, and even that might be a little aggressive sometimes.
Yep.
But this is how you can, once you start getting used to looking at these numbers, then you can start figuring out some kind of future information as well, and it really helps.
Yeah, that's a good point. Everyone always asks, how do you create budgets?
Yep.
If you haven't existed at all, this is harder. But once you at least got a year in, the biggest thing we do is we take our giving units, our giving unit average, and then we project a little bit of growth.
Yep.
It's been hard with COVID.
Yep, it changed. It
And
definitely changed.
so it's been hard to do that. And again, part of it, the Carey Nieuwhof Leadership Podcast It's one I actually listen, it's one of the few that I listen to every single week.
Yeah.
And their most recent one, as of this recording, was with Rick Warren, and I just love how practical it was. He said the number one factor as to whether or not your church will grow is the location of your church. And I was like, that's just true.
Yeah.
Like he's like, he's been involved in other churches, but it's like, Saddleback was planted in a growing area.
Yeah.
And so that's a large reason. He's just like, why we grew is
Sure.
because it's just people were moving there.
Yeah.
And so again, we live in Raleigh. It's high. A lot of people move here. So, you don't want to be overly optimistic. I mean, part of it is hopefully we're being somewhat effective, but part of the fact that we can grow is because a lot of people move here.
Yeah.
And so, you want to take that into account as well. If you're in an area that's not necessarily grown a lot population wise, you want to be careful and not just assume, people are going to give. But if you take giving unit average, that can give you a good sense of, projected income for the next year.
And it helps to know this isn't something you got to necessarily spend a ton of time researching and figuring out. But this is why it helps to have an elder team or a management team, because someone else might do this for you. But it helps to know what some of the average numbers are for these things, because especially early on, I think you'll find that in a lot of cases your average gift or your average donor will be higher than what the actual average is, because people are more generous up front and it's exciting in the first year and things like that.
Yeah.
But it helps to kind of know what is normal, so you can kind of not be overly aggressive and also not overly conservative, unaggressive, But so you can kind of split the difference a little bit, where like you may have had like a couple or a handful of really big donations and stuff like that, and so it kind of bumps these averages up some. But if you know what the average, what's kind of normal, especially for your area and size, then you can kind of see maybe we shouldn't be incredibly aggressive when looking at next year, because this may not happen again. Or we just had a down year and maybe we need to have a little bit of a faith budget and bump it up a little bit. So it helps to know what some of these numbers are actually supposed to be, then look at what yours is and kind of figure out the future year from that.
Yep. So giving units and giving unit average can be helpful metrics to track.
Yeah, we got into a budget conversation there. But
there you go.
That's a different
A lot
conversation.
of last questions. Hopefully that was helpful. Number 4, number of unique people who serve in a month. So this could also be helpful if you're trying to figure out, and again, people who, it depends on how you do this. People can have really bloated membership roles. Every year we ask our partners to recommit, so that helps us with this. But you have a lot of people who, quote unquote, are supposed to serve.
Yeah.
But if they never serve, just like if people are signed up for groups and they're in groups, then that's not really helpful. And so one way to see is like how many people actually served in a month. Now, this also depends on how you do serving. We, for the most part, try to ask people to serve once a month is all we do. And so anyway, if you're trying to figure out ways to show engagement in serving wise, again, just saying how many people have signed up to do something is often not a very helpful metric, because it doesn't mean they've actually done it. And so figuring out, writing down whose names, this is a little bit, maybe a little bit more work. I don't know, maybe not than the community group one, because you can do it every week. But if you're a smaller church, who served.
Yeah.
And so you can just have a spreadsheet yourself of all the list of people who serve, or if you have bigger teams, you could have kids and production and mute band and hospitality or whatever. But this also could be a helpful way to track, like, how many people are we actually engaging with? Are they actually serving, or are they not?
Yeah, and it helps to actually look at how many unique people are serving instead of just like if you're kind of viewing it as we don't really have many holes or it's pretty easy to schedule, then it may seem like things are fine, but without realizing that there's some people that are serving a ton.
Yeah, 3 to 4 times a month.
Exactly. And like when we first regathered from COVID, there were
Right.
people who were definitely serving way more than we wanted them to, and they were perfectly fine with it and happy with it, and it helped us get by, which was great. But we didn't have these big teams like it may have seemed if we just looked at, we're pretty much fully staffed every Sunday, which we were,
Yeah.
but that kind of idea. But if you're looking at how many unique people are serving, then that'll kind of remove these outliers that maybe want to serve more and maybe utilize them. They want to serve more and maybe they can, and that's fine. But it doesn't necessarily show that you're growing the amount of people serving. So again, how many unique people are serving will really help tell you that.
Yep. Again, that's helpful. Because I was going to say, a lot of times, people will say they're totally fine with serving more until they're not.
Yep. Yep.
And it'll just be like, I'm done. And so, and we see that a lot. We have a lot of people, and I'm glad, but we really do to once a month. Some people will do twice, but like, that's it. We won't, we really won't let you do more than that.
Yeah.
Even though right now we're at one service and it's not a big ask. It's just to respect people, to say thankful. But especially right now where there's a high need people will more likely do it. They'll be more burnt out. But one of the things that I found, it's been very curious to me, I think why this is so important is that we get a lot of people, when they come to a new city, whether they moved here or because of COVID, people switch churches or whatever, and they don't want to serve yet because they were kind of burnt out from their other church.
Yeah.
And I get it. Like, we don't pressure them at all, but I've always want to be like, we're only asking you to serve once a month.
Yeah.
But I totally get it because your experience was, and it's not that they were like mad about it, but they realized, oh, this is a lot.
Yeah.
And so I just really like the fact when people come here and they say they need a break and then they jump into serving, that it's like, we know that they're not going to get burned out here because we're not going to schedule them more than once a month, maybe twice a month, but that's not going to be very often. And again, for us, since we're at one service, it's not that big a deal to serve like in hospitality or something like that because you're coming a little bit early, but we're not doing multiple services right now. And so it's, if you have multiple services, like for us, how we do it, is like we do one serve team, but they serve both services. And so you really want to keep it to once a month because that's the big ask. And so anyway, number of unique people who served in a month, that could be a helpful way if you're trying to track engagement, not just people who have signed up to serve or whatever, but if they're actually doing it. And of course, if they're not, it can lead to conversations, not guilt conversations, but hey, you want to serve or what's going on? How can we help? That sort of thing.
And if you're looking at this stuff often, especially if you have a person that's leading your serve teams or if you're doing it yourself, it'll help you see kind of if people have trends of not serving, even though they're signed up. Where sometimes I think you can get kind of bogged down in just the month to month, and this person, if you use Planning Center, this person declined again, and you don't really think about the fact that it's been 4 months that they've declined or something along those lines. And so actually looking at this, you can actually see, hey, this person hasn't actually served in a long time, even though they're a partner, and that's an issue. And they're on a team. So if you're looking at kind of what we do is we look at our partnership as a whole, and someone might be on a team, and so we think, good, they're serving. But if we're not looking at actually who's serving, then they could be on a team and serving, quote unquote, but not actually serving, and so not actually doing the thing they said they would do.
Yep. So number of unique people served in a month. Number 5, Connect cards received. So this is actually not a very difficult one, but often overlooked. And really helpful because if you get a good number of Connect cards, it's kind of, you can't really, depending on how you do it, you can't really like know percentage wise how many people, I guess you could if you had people fill out cards every week, which we don't. Like, it's not like you don't do this to see like what's your return rate, but it's just helpful to know that, hey, if we're getting X amount of cards a month, but our serve teams aren't growing, our giving's not growing, you can kind of, there are probably ways you can measure this if you really want to. We don't. We just do Connect cards. But you can kind of like see like what's going on here. Like, is there a disconnect? Are we not following up with people? We have episodes on that. But if they give us a Connect card and we're getting multiple a month, you're not going to get 100%.
Yeah.
Even maybe not 50%. But you should see some sort of, increase if you're getting Connect cards. And so for us, we have, like many people, we have a paper sheet where our person will write down the attendance. Of course, we put that online digitally Sunday afternoon.
Yeah.
On our attendance sheet, it also has Connect cards. So Brittany, our hospitality person, she'll just write on that how many Connect cards we received so that we can know what's going on. And this is really helpful because, we've shared recently, this past fall, we had a problem with our Connect cards. We had a problem where our production, we've shared this before. It was make sure you're following up.
Yeah.
We had our production, it was COVID fall. There was another spike. Raleigh's pretty conservative. So like that impacted our church a lot because people were like kind of scared because our community is all like, meh. And I don't mean that bad way. It just was. And so, but our production team and our band was growing a little bit, and our kids were growing a little bit, but our hospitality team wasn't growing. And hospitality team is the easiest place to serve because it doesn't require training. It's often in the least time commitment. And the person who was in charge of that transitioned off staff. And then we found out after they transitioned off staff that for 8 of their last 9 weeks, their Connect cards were not put into our follow-up process. And we have a multiple week automated follow-up process, whatever. And it made a ton of sense.
Yeah.
It's like, why are people not getting connected when we're getting their information? And so that, I don't know, it helps you see like, oh, there was a problem there. Like it's not that like no new people were coming. That would make sense why people aren't serving more.
Yeah.
It's that we weren't following up with them. And so that was a extreme example that will hopefully never happen again. But that stuff can be helpful. It's like, if you're not growing, I don't know, a lot of serve teams, well, if you're not getting a lot of new people, makes sense. If you're getting a lot of new people, then there's a disconnect there. Or if you're not, depending, again, all this is kind of relative to how big your church already is. Because
Yeah.
if you got more people, then more people can invite them. And of course, if you're in a growing area, but like if you're not getting any new people at all, then that could be an issue. Like, what are we going to do about this? So anyway, track and connect cards can help, future engagement and see where people are. And it's an easy thing to do.
Yeah, it really helps kind of determine if you, especially if you're not growing or aren't growing, it can help determine the reason why. Like
Yeah.
we can see we're small. I mean, I think most of us listening, you're small enough to where you can tell if there are new people there, or
General idea, yeah.
generally new people there. You might not catch every person, but you can probably have a general idea. But if we're not growing, but we seem to have new people all the time, we can see we're not getting any connect cards.
Yeah.
Then it's not the problem. Isn't that we're not getting enough people in the door? The problem is that we're not engaging them in some capacity, and then we can start drilling down to see what that reason is. Or we're not growing, but we're getting a bunch of connect cards, and the reason might be we're not following up with them well, or we're not getting them plugged in where they need to get plugged in. And so it can really help identify what the issue is if there is one, and it just kind of gives you more information about the people that are actually coming through your door and how you can engage them better.
Yeah, that's another point. You won't always get it right, but generally speaking, if you're a smaller church, probably less than 150, you can have an idea of whether or not you saw new people. Maybe they aren't their first time or not, but you can have a general idea. And so if you're not getting any connect cards, that's also a problem because
Yeah.
like, why aren't we getting them? We have, I don't know what the number is. I think it was in the last few months. We have an episode specifically on how to get more connect cards, because I would also argue they're not as hard to get as you might think. It is true that not everyone's going to fill them out. I probably my first time would not fill out a connect card,
Mhm.
which is why in the episode we talk about don't say if it's your first time with us, say if you're new with us, because if somebody comes 2 or 3 times, then their chances of filling it out if they're told to are higher. If
Yeah.
you say if it's your first time and it's like, well, it's not my first time anymore, then you won't get it. So there are things you can do to get connect cards. So go back and listen to that episode if you are having new people, but people are not filling them out.
Yep, exactly.
So connect cards received, that can also be a good thing. And then the number 6, this is a more open one, but we put it this way: tracking attendance at any consistent non-Sunday service you do. So whatever are the unique things you might do, tracking attendance or participation can help show you if that's actually happening. So, groups, for example, are one that a lot of us do. It's like if you're in a group, that's you're getting connected with. That's a good thing. If your church does like a I don't know, a monthly service project or whatever, tracking how many people showed up, and again, depending on what it actually is, if you can track names. Because if your church does, a monthly service project, maybe that's a value for you, and you have 10 people show up, and let's say that's a good number based on your size of your church. I don't know, but if it's like the same 10 people every week, well, or every month, like that's great on the one hand, but it means it's probably not sustainable, or other people in the church aren't bought in, or you haven't explained it well enough, or whatever. If it's the same, if there's never like new growth or new people, then you might want to do something to try to alter that. But if there's anything you do, any consistent, it has to be, I would say it needs to be at least monthly. Like you don't have to do stuff monthly, but if you do something once a quarter, there's a good chance people get sick, go out of town. Like you can't expect that to be a measurement of like what they're doing.
Yeah.
But I say if there's any consistent thing you do at least once a month, that's important for your church. Finding a way to track attendance or participation can help you know if it's being engaged or not. Not just, we think a good number of people showed up.
Yeah, and I mean this can especially help kind of gauge the engagement of people who may have schedules that don't always allow them on Sundays. Like whether it's a work thing or whatever, then you can see that hey, these people are actually still engaged even though they can't necessarily engage as much on Sundays. Because one thing we didn't talk about is we track this, but I wouldn't necessarily give it as the most important thing to track is engagement in our live stream, where we look at that, but in my mind at least I don't think it's the most important thing for us to track, because that's not something we're trying to necessarily we're trying to give it as an option, but we're not trying to grow it, so we're not trying to we don't necessarily count that as someone who's necessarily really engaged in New City if they're just watching us online. But this so instead of tracking that, something like this can help determine the engagement of someone who maybe can't attend on a Sunday, but is still engaged in the church. And so, yeah, they might be watching the live stream, and that's how they kind of get their Sunday service. But are they still actually engaged in the church, or is it just something they, put on in the background or turn on and then turn off kind of thing. And so something like this really helps you kind of catch those people who maybe Sunday won't catch.
Yeah, like we've done in the past. We even did an episode on this years ago. We did something called the $5 Give Club for a while. So the part of the reason why we stopped doing it was the number of people who gave to it was not consistent with the number of people who said that they loved it.
Yeah.
And it's like
yeah.
it's like $5-10 a month, and you always talk about how you love it, and you don't give anything to it.
Yeah.
I don't think you actually love it. But tracking that actually showed us that.
Mhm.
It showed us it wasn't effective. It wasn't really what we wanted to do. And so again, if there's anything you do, whether it's an extra generosity thing or service thing or whatever that's important to your church, tracking it into the individual level would be helpful, not just the big general level. To show people are actually engaged with it. Can be helpful.
And like with that example, this doesn't just show your people's engagement, but this can tell you if this is a thing worth doing in the long run. Because everything, especially if it's something you're passionate about, we can all convince ourselves that something is working. Especially if it was your idea, if something you really want to work, we can. I mean, I've done it before. Convince myself like this thing is working, or we just need to give it one more shot, or whatever.
Yeah.
But if you actually have data that you can look at, you can see maybe yes, it is, but also this is not. People are not engaging with it. Like you said, it's the same people that are coming to it, and they may be coming just because it's a church thing, and so they feel kind of obligated to come, whatever the reason. But this will actually help you determine if it's something you should continue doing or not.
Yep. So those are 6 church metrics that show engagement to see if you're actually engaging people in the craziness of this year. If this episode was helpful, we'd love a rating or review wherever you listen to your podcast. And of course, you can find us on YouTube.
Sure can.
And on Facebook, the Practical Church Planting Group. Ask questions. People are joining all the time. You can connect with us there. And until next week, we'll see you on Practical Church Planting.